Now, don't worry, I am running out of videos now, but here's another compilation of TV programs that were made into Spectrum games. This time, action cartoons. So what I'm talking about is those sort of overlong toy adverts you used to get for things like Transformers and G.I. Joe. Now, you may be wondering where Masters Universe is. That's on another video. You may be wondering where some of the more British-centred ones are. They're on another video. You may be wondering where something like Asterix is. That's going to be on a video yet to come. I will cover all of them. I have covered all of them. I'm just putting them in little collections now. But yes, I think 2 hours is enough anyway. You'll get square eyes looking at that screen all day, I swear. But yes, another video. Take it away, old me. Action and force. That's so much kinetic wordage. The little 3.5-inch plastic figures fired from the womb of Action Man and his featureless plastic groin. We are here to discuss them, their Spectrum game and their cartoon show. And what do we have here? Yes, two games based on the fully posable buggers, both seemingly made by people who had never seen Action Force before. But before we get to the video games, let's take a look at the source material. And bear with me, because this is quite a confusing one. So there were these two figures that were incredibly popular in the early 70s. Barbies for men, if you like, because they were essentially the same sort of thing, but instead of small dogs and like handbags and hand dryers, they had big old machine guns and tanks instead. They were called Action Man and G.I. Joe. They were by two separate companies, Palitoy and Hasbro. When sales abruptly halted due to the rise of Kenner's much more collectible, smaller and cheaper Star Wars figures, G.I. Joe makers Hasbro and Palitoy's Action Man went, shag it, let's just copy what they're doing, and shrunk G.I. Joseph and the Man of Action. But they did it independently at first. Action Force was infantry based with packs of faceless soldiers of different types, all personality free, save for a few key characters like the villainous Red Shadows and their leader Baron Ironblood. Along with a few memorable vehicles. I'm sure a lot of us will remember this giant machine gun covered flying skull. Yes. It did okay, but G.I. Joe was clearly the better option. They had better characters, better personality and better toys. So eventually a deal was done and Action Force basically abandoned their barely movable faceless squaddies and slapped their slogan on the G.I. Joe toys instead, and pretended that G.I. Joe characters like Flint and Lady J had a more British-based heritage than their American origins. And so, lo and behold, G.I. Joe became Action Force over here, and the toy-shifting cartoon series was tarted up with a new Action Forcey theme and a different logo. A Filmation show running from 1983 to 1986 was followed by an animated movie, and G.I. Joe Action Force was a phenomenon, mainly in its native country across the pond, but it was mainly known in the UK for those early 2000 memes made by Chicago filmmaker Eric Fensler. You know the ones. They were the ones that basically remixed the animation from the PSAs at the end of each episode into a more surreal and adult equivalent. They were all very funny, pork chop sandwiches and all. Now moving on to the games, published by Virgin Games and released on the Spectrum, the Commodore 64 and the Amstrad in 1987. The first Action Force is actually a little bit different from its 8-bit counterparts. The Spectrum version unfortunately doesn't have a lot in the way of enemy craft, unlike its brethren, with the 48K version basically just having several ground-to-air missile emplacements and skybound mines to give you jip, and jip they will give thee. You are Mutant Ninja and black leather wearing hard man and cool name haver Snake Eyes, and you've tied a small helicopter to your back. In another major difference, you don't control Snake Eyes in the Amstrad and Commodore 64 versions. Instead, you get Wild Bill in his big old helicopter. I'll let you decide which is better there. I mean, Snake Eyes is cooler, but, you know, that helicopter looks a bit ridiculous. Your job is to clear a way for a small ATV called the Striker to traverse some terrain, because Chief Bastard Cobra Commander hates tiny little vehicles filled with soldiers, because they run over his geraniums, his German shepherds, and his pet Germain Greers. Yeah, none of that is true. Anyway, you do this by getting rid of the naughty boys, their toys, the walls, and by flying bridge parts over rivers so that the ATV can traverse ever closer to putting a medium-sized shell right up Cobra Commander's poop shoot wrong'un. How does it play? Okay, I guess. Control is a bit skittish with the helicopter backpack not really having inertia as such, but it does have a certain tricksy handling that makes manoeuvring between the onslaught of explosives very difficult, which makes the game quite challenging, maybe not in a good way. The idea of protecting the ATV is kind of interesting, but it's not very well implemented. And while Snake Eyes is one of the most beloved G.I. Joe characters, it's a very wasted appearance, as this high-kicking double-hard sword-wielding ninja, Swinehund, is permanently strapped into his little helicopter, and there's nothing in the way of recognisable Cobra vehicles or soldiers either. Programmers Gang of Five, who also produced the sequel and the superb Dan Dare, are quality coders no doubt, but a bit more time spent with the source material could have borne more interesting fruit in my opinion. Magazine reviews, as seemingly bleeding ever with games of the era, are vastly differing in their opinion. CVG, in their combined review with the Commodore 64 version, fair blew their proverbial beans over Action Force, making it very hard to play the tape, awarding it a 10 out of 10, saying that the game had great presentation, nice sound effects, the works. Sinclair user were similarly pleased with the first Action Force game on the system, regaling the colourful action game with a 9 out of 10 and saying that the complex, fast-moving arcade action is going to take a long time to master, and it's great fun to look at and play. Crash, though, they didn't have such kind words for G.I. Joseph's 8-bit carry-on, however, slamming the game. They said that Action Force comes as an unwelcome surprise from the Gang of Five, though the front end is very pleasant indeed. Unfortunately, the game itself lacks substance, and the jerky but colourful graphics do little to entice you into it. They scored Action Force with a lowly 35%. Your Sinclair played it a bit cooler with Action Force's debut on the rubber-keyed Chum, complaining about a lack of originality and awarding it a 6 out of 10, which, you know what, to me seems about right. Action Force 2, though, now that's a different prospect. The first thing you'll no doubt notice about Action Force 2, as everyone does, is the music. It's not that it's bad. Oh no, it's brilliant. It's just hugely out of place. It's unmistakably a very decent 128k rendition of Duran Duran's A View to a Kill, the eponymous pop song from the Bond movie of the same name. It suits the gameplay, no doubt, but it adds further fuel to the argument that Virgin's Gang of Five spent about 30 seconds looking at the Argos catalogue toy page as research for Action Force and G.I. Joe's games. Every G.I. Joe fan remembers Terry, right? You know, Terry, the guy who chucks 10-ton weights out of windows. You know, that character. Everyone had that toy, didn't they? They didn't because it didn't exist. The plotline is that Cobra, those international terrorist buggers, have kidnapped a load of citizens, and it's up to the two-man operation of Quick Kick and Sniper Airtight to rescue them. Looking at the screenshots, you'd be forgiven for thinking you control Quick Kick, running about kicking Cobra operatives in the chops and testicle areas. But no, you do not. In fact, I think Quick Kick might have a bit of a jippy tum, as he seems reluctant to lift his leg even a little bit to deliver one of his self-proclaimed quick kicks. Instead, he just sort of jogs along, climbing up the occasional ladder. You see, you aren't playing as Quick Kick. You are the other Joe in the team. You're off screen. You are airtight. Your job is to snipe the obstacles and wrong-uns out of the way, and it's bloody good. The gameplay is pure trial and error. You'll have to memorise where nasties are going to appear, and you'll do that from your previous playthrough. You basically have to set out a sequence in your head from your previous playthroughs to stand a chance of taking out all the dangers on every screen. It sounds frustrating, but actually it's really fun, and it turns the game into a terrific challenge, almost like a memory puzzle. I really enjoyed it, and when I finish this series and compile them into order of quality, I suspect that Action Force 2 might be a very strong contender for a top 10 slot. Not bad at all. I never played it before today. Graphics and presentation are brilliantly done too, with the little red sniper scope at the bottom of the screen accurately relaying all the action from the main screen itself. Oh, it's not at all useful, but it looks really cool, and sometimes that is all I need. A weird feature is how you replenish the health of our militaristic pair. There's an energy bar that depletes throughout their adventure, no doubt something to do with Quick Kick's stomach flu. This is replenished by shooting the many American flags that dot the landscape. I'm sure that this will get some of the more patriotic types on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean crying into their MAGA hats. They love guns and the stars and stripes, but don't let them copulate, for Christ's sakes. So, Action Force 2 then, a very nice surprise for me. Magazines loved it too, with high accolades being awarded by Crash, Sinclair User and Your Sinclair. Crash gave it a 90%, offering that Action Force 2 is a brilliant and action-packed game, and you should buy it today. I don't know how you're going to buy it today anymore. You could go on eBay, I suppose. Your Sinclair didn't hold back either, giving it a 9 out of 10, with the declaration that strategic carnage was matched by snazzy programming and natty graphics. Sinclair User just flat out gave Action Force 2 a straight 10 out of 10 and lauded it as being an amazingly good game license, which combines originality with graphic sophistication. And there you go then. What a cracker Action Force 2 turned out to be. Action Force 1, it was alright. So I've had a little thought about it, and I reckon that Earth could easily have Mars and Mercury, and it could probably take down Venus, even though, it's all fiery, isn't it, Venus, and it's got a bit of lava to it. But ultimately, Earth will get its Harris handed to it by at least one of the gas giants. Ultimately, Uranus will win in the battle of the solar system because of the several billion years worth of rage it's built up, because of the name drives it's received off of the other planets. There's a reason Pluto backed out of this fight a few decades ago, because you know what? Pluto's smart. Be more like Pluto, avoid fights. Oh wait, this is about the Spectrum game based on the 70s cartoon, isn't it? Never mind. In April of 1977, noted TV producer Sandy Frank attended a TV conference in France and witnessed Tatsunoko production Gatchaman. He probably nodded sagely and wandered off. And then Star Wars happened the next month, and he promptly ran back to Japan with a blank cheque for all that interplanetary spaceship zapping. Battle of the Planets began broadcasting on US tellies a year later, with the BBC showing it a year after that. Battle of the Planets was a highly edited version of the original Gatchaman show from Japan, but not to the same level of later Japanese import Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. It followed the plot of the original Gatchaman show pretty gamely, with just reductions on some things such as the violence and swearing within. Battle of the Planets featured 5 brave heroes, otherwise known as the G-Force, as they waged war against Zoltar from planet Spectra. They piloted a spaceship called the Phoenix, which itself contained a series of smaller vehicles to help them in their pan-galactic struggle. It is a show that is fondly remembered by children of a 70s vintage, with the show making the grade in a pair of those early 2000s best of TV lists that were so popular on Channel 4. I'm sure you remember one or two of them. It's also got a very strong online fan community. It's undoubtedly one of the West's most beloved earlier encounters with anime. You know, before the 90s and all your Akiras, your Studio Ghiblis and your intrusive tentacle porns took over and made the place all disgusting. Microgen acquired the license for Battle of the Planets in 1986 and released the game on all the major 8-bit computers. It was made by their ace programmer Chris Hinsley, who, you may know, was behind some of Microgen's most popular games such as Pyjama-Rama, Everyone's a Wally and Frostbite. The anime high kickery and bird-helmeted costumes are sidelined in favour of an Elite crossed with the Atari version of Star Wars arcade-type shooter. Smooth vector graphics are the order of the day here, as you zip about a galaxy fending off a particularly forward invasion effort from the forces of Zoltar. Oh, Zoltar! The encroaching fleets hover all zappy and angry near several planets, including the planet Pete. Didn't Pete used to run a fruit stall in Walford? The forces of Spectra are busy beaming down a load of battle-zone tanks onto the surface of the planets, and it is up to the G-Force to put an end to that sort of intergalactic aggressive chicanery. You can put a stop to their encroachment early doors by blasting the white off their teeth before they've even had a chance to put tank to terra firma. But you can also fly down to the planet's surface and put a rocket or two right up their turrets while stopping off for a good old refuel or a top up on your armour. Then you can zoosh back into the atmosphere by merely tapping away at your acceleration button and blast your way to a nearby Stargate. From there you can rendezvous with another gang of extraterrestrial bastards intent on conquering the local planet. You'll only get to pilot the Phoenix here, which is a bit of a shame that we don't get to see some of the other ships, nor do we see the cast of Battle of the Planets anywhere but on the front cover. The Phoenix has a HUD that can display rough positions of your adversaries, stargates, space stations and fuel depots, along with status bars for your general health, your levels of torpedoes, your score and how close your laser is to overheating. You must be very careful not to overuse your laser, else it'll burn out. It may seem a little daunting on your first play, but really it's probably because it's alarming to see a game this complex on a 48K outside, of course, of things like Starion and Elite. It's no more complex to control, though, than, say, X-Wing or something like that, and it's as smooth and as slick as ejaculate on whale skin. I won't tell you how I know that. There is an injunction. It's amazing that whales can get injunctions, but one certainly did. But make no mistake, the game is slick and smooth, and there's none of the jerkiness that plagued the similar Terrahawks game that I reviewed some time ago. It's an ambitious game, perhaps light on Battle of the Planets content, but big on gameplay. Obviously, it's not going to be challenging Elite's crown anytime soon, but it's by no means any sort of slouch. If you weren't so keen on the trading aspects of Elite and preferred the space combat, well, this is the game for you, I can assure you. It's by no means a mindless blaster either, though. There is an element of strategy on how you can keep your resources and how you're going to tackle the planets and keep them in good order. I genuinely wasn't expecting this game to be much cop at all, but it's ended up being one of the best games I've played so far in this series, some 68 episodes in. It's a tough game, but it's not unfair, and while it does eventually get repetitive, I'm absolutely going to forgive that it has the Death Star representing the planets, because if it doesn't bother George Lucas and his team of lawyers, then it shouldn't bother any of us. Yes, it is a crap use of the franchise, I guess, but it is a bloody good game. Sinclair user gave Battle of the Planets a 4 out of 5, praising Chris Hinsley for the programming work he put into it and the overall level of detail. CMVG also loved it. They gave it an impressive 9 out of 10 and suggest that Elite fans might want to give up trading for a while to indulge in a decent zapping session with a copy of Battle of the Planets. With their 8 out of 10 review, your Sinclair warn you that you shouldn't panic if you don't stay alive too long on your first time. It'll all come together if you hang on in there. That's good advice to both Battle of the Planets players and young virginal men about to take the skin boat to Tuna Town for the very first time. Crash weren't quite as enamoured as the rest of us though. They gave it a still respectable 71% and said that the game seems overpriced at $9.95, but it's still not a bad shoot 'em up. Admittedly, it is a bit of a niche genre, but really there is no more complete cowboy experience as a video game than Red Dead Redemption 2. Bar fights, weather-swelled equine love spuds, shootouts, bank robberies, it's the alpha and omega of the Western-based video game. It's a long, long way from our beginnings in cowboy games, such as the ones found on the humble ZX Spectrum. As good as Ultimate's gunfight was, it isn't anywhere near as impressive as Rockstar's games, because obviously, how can it be? So let's quit looking for a really good, realistic cowboy game and just head off into space and find a cowboy with superpowers who has a horse that can get all bipedal and stuff and shooty. 30-30, don't need no swelling love spuds, and luckily he doesn't have them. Sarah Jane! Bravestarr was the last roll of the dice for Filmation, the creators of Masters of the Universe, airing from 1987 to 1988. Shortly afterwards, Filmation closed. But it was a valiant attempt to recapture the old glory of Masters of the Universe. Set on the planetary 3-star system New Texas, a mere 1,957 light-years from Earth, much of the conflict is derived from the planet's valuable mineral Kerium, which is desired by villains like Stampede and Tex Hex's outlaw gang, the Carrion Bunch. That's already a good start to your space cowboy lore. They're opposed, of course, by the eponymous Marshal Bravestarr, a Native American with the power of spirit animals. Now, I'm not certain how you can be a Native American despite being born 1,957 light-years from America, but there we are. Anyway, Marshal Bravestarr can call on the eyes of the hawk, the ears of the wolf, the strength of the bear, the speed of the puma, and of course the anus of the baboon. Maybe not the last one, but it is one to consider if anyone fancies doing a remake. He's assisted by a troupe of heroes, some of which had really annoying voices, and some of which had faces that made me feel a bit uncomfortable. Is your face imploding, sir? Some of the episodes had a strong moral message. One notable episode had a kid overdose on a drug similar to LSD and then died. That is, of course, pretty heavy stuff for a kid's animation about space cowboys and their talking horses. Wow. And now on to the game. Go Media acquired the rights, obviously expecting the franchise to do some similar things to He-Man, which of course it really didn't, as Filmation closed after putting the first series out. Oops. Go handed development duties to good old Probe Software, a team well known to squeeze a performance out of the machine, as evidenced by things like Dan Dare 3, Trantor and Turrican. Also released on the Commodore 64 and Amstrad CPC in 1987, Bravestarr is a side-scrolling action title that owes a fair old nod to the likes of Green Beret, Cobra and Rolling Thunder. Bravestarr is given a limited time in which to rescue his mentor Shaman, who is the only man who can help him prevent Stampede from bringing people back from the dead to serve him as a zombie army. Time itself acts as your energy bar. If you take a battering, then you're going to end up in a grave, but luckily only for half an hour of in-game time. Beat that, Jesus, your Easter Sunday trick ain't looking so good now. It took 3 days. But this is time that the good marshal can ill afford. Run out of time and you're stuffed. You can compile clues by entering various buildings and investigating and interrogating folk. Although seemingly sometimes Bravestarr doesn't see one person in a small room. I mean, get your eyes of the hawk out, you mole-oculared fool. There is clearly a person right there. It's a unique approach to break up the action like this, as the respawning is relentless and therefore the slower pace can be welcome after a while. It can be hard to get the information out of the bar patrons though. Sometimes they want a bit of money for their loose lips, let's say. If you manage to uncover enough information, you can discover a saddle and you can then shift to another zone where you play this neat little shooter interlude. As I've said before, the action is relentless. Ducking, jumping and hammering away at the fire button like Billy-O. The 9 minutes of actual game time erodes quickly, especially when airborne enemies are dropping bombs and taking great chunks out of your time health. The animation is of a high standard, with Bravestarr performing all of his shooting and high-octane acrobatics very smoothly. Probe don't actually bring out their signature giant colour clash-free sprites here. Bravestar's sprites are instead small and a bit ill-defined, but then there are a vast quantity of enemies joining you on screen to be shot by that trusty six-shooter of Marshal Bravestarr quite a lot of the time. Bravestar's gameplay is a bit of a standard 8-bit side-scroller really, which is a good and a bad thing. It's absolutely relentless, yet somehow quite repetitive despite the odd mid-game sojourn into bar interrogation. Reviews of Bravestarr were mixed, as seems par for the course with the Spectrum magazines of the time. Crash weren't huge fans, giving Bravestarr a 46 out of 100. Sinclair User, in this incredibly weirdly laid out 3-review page, also gave it a slating and a 4-star out of 10 score. Your Sinclair though loved it, bestowing it a 9 out of 10. Methinks they've been on the moonshine. As ever, I think the truth is once again somewhere in the middle. Unlike, of course, 3030's testicles. Where they at? In October 2018, the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, a faction of 90 climate scientists from 40 different countries, issued a report concluding that if humans didn't take immediate collective action to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius by the year 2040, the consequences will be baked into the natural systems of the planet. From there would be no turning back, and droughts, wildfires, flooding and famines would cease to become anomalies and would instead become seasonal markers, like when leaves change brown in the autumn. How was this treated by most of the world leaders? Well, with a sort of collective shrug mainly. Shareholders got a sharehold. The most high-profile world leader, with one of the biggest countries in the world, and therefore one of the biggest contributors to greenhouse gases, even regularly tweets that he firmly doesn't even believe that global warming is a thing. My question is, where is Captain Planet when all this is going on? The theme tune assured me he was going to take pollution down to zero and put down guys who like to loot and plunder. Well, pollution is nowhere near zero, Captain Planet, and looters and plunderers are looting and plundering like never before, mate. Can you sort it out, yeah? Come on! Give us a hand, you mulleted green Jesus of the trees. Captain Planet and the Planeteers was an animated show produced by Turner Programme Services and Dick No Laughing Animation and ran from September 1990 to December 1992. It was followed up by The New Adventures of Captain Planet, which ran from 1993 to 1996. That second series was produced by Hanna-Barbera because apparently that's all I cover these days, seemingly, and actually by accident. The story of Captain Planet and the Planeteers tells of 5 woke pan-international environmentalist teenagers given the powers of earth, wind, fire, boogie wonderland... scratch that. Go back a bit. Earth, wind, fire, water and heart. Heart was decidedly shortchanged in my opinion, given the power of making you care about puppies and weeping willows. What do you mean I'm missing the point of this? Anyway, they battle against a shifty collection of earth-wrecking billionaire bastards until they get outmatched and then have to combine all their powers to bring forth the eponymous hero Deus Ex Machina, Captain Planet, with his absolutely incredible green spiky top mullet. So yes, it was an animated show with a strong environmental message, and Captain Planet was also backed by a galaxy of the 80s and 90s most fabulous Hollywood stars, keen for a paycheck and a good publicity combo. Series regulars included Whoopi Goldberg playing Gaia, who is Mother Nature, and she's also joined by her Star Trek co-star LeVar Burton playing Ghanaian Planeteer leader Kwame. Villains included Meg Ryan as Dr. Blight, Ed Asner as Hoggish Greedley, Jeff Goldblum as Vermonious Scum, James Coburn as Loot and Plunder, Martin Sheen and Jim Cummings sharing the role of Sly Sludge, and Dean Stockwell as Duke Nukem. No, not that one. You don't see him at any point throwing money around badly animated, pixelated strippers. Arch-villain Zahn was actually played by 3 major celebrities in David Warner, Malcolm McDowell and noted eco-warrior Sting. The series did reasonably well given the fact that it ran for 6 years across its 2 iterations, and so a video game seemed inevitable. In fact, it came out very early, and most people will remember the Amiga 500 pack that came bundled with Captain Planet. Mindscape were behind that, and also versions for the NES, the Atari ST, the Amstrad, and what we're talking about today, the ZX Spectrum. Mindscape took the decision to develop 3 different games to suit the various platforms' capabilities. So there was one for the NES, one for the 2 16-bit consoles, and one for the 2 8-bit computers. Probe Software, fronted by Dave Perry, handled the 8-bit versions. They brought their usual eye-searing use of the Spectrum's colour palette for the 3-level shooter, which does away with the pretense that anyone wants to play as the lame Planeteers and puts you firmly in those shiny silver slacks of Captain Planet himself. The game came with a manual stuffed with environmental tips to ensure that you're being a good Planeteer yourself. It's probably best now not to mention that neither the box or the manual were made from recycled paper. Graphically, it's another hit for Perry, with large, non-jerky, colourful sprites zipping about without any attribute clash, once again showing that Probe Software had done a deal with some sort of ancient arcane evil to get the Spectrum to perform this way. Either that, or they're really good programmers. One of the two. I'm going to stick with the first because it sounds more exciting, doesn't it? The game plays a fair bit like Dan Dare 3, a zippy horizontal shooter with the captain spamming enemies and environmental aggressors with his spangly, presumably environmentally sound stardust. In the first level, Captain Planet has to stop Sly Sludge from polluting the atmosphere with CFCs. I think CFCs were probably the most 90s pollution you could get. He does this by blowing up radar dishes, because radar dishes have CFCs in them. Okay. Storyline wise, Sly Sludge is trying to deliberately ruin the ozone layer so he can open more sunny resorts, which sounds pretty good, but then you think about it and it actually sounds a bit of a disaster. And that's just the first level. Later levels have loot and plunder stealing dolphins for some reason. In the third and final level, Dr. Blight decides to blow up the rainforests for shits and giggles. She could turn that into paper, couldn't she? Make more boxes and manuals for Captain Planet games, perhaps. What's she doing? Does she not like the look of proboscis monkeys? Because look at them. You're blowing them up. You're blowing up proboscis monkeys, Dr. Blight. You've got to stop that. Look at them. How funny they are. Oh, look at you, you cute, you funny dick-nosed thing. This is all against a tough time limit, but the in-game timer can be bolstered by flying into these clocks in an into-the-screen pre-level minigame that's as fun as putting on socks filled with bees. Overall, it's a very probey game, stunningly beautiful for the Spectrum and a masterclass of clever programming. But also, it's a very probey game in that it's frustrating and as shallow as the Adriatic Sea in the year 2072, if we carry on the way we are. Bloody humans! Your Sinclair gave it a dismal 49%, not at all impressed with the gameplay. Crash were a great deal more chuffed with it, awarding it a 88%. They must have been blinded by the pretty graphics. Sinclair User sat in between the two with a perfectly fair, and I totally agree with them, 65%, and that brings the episode to a close. So I want to make sure you're all recycling, be very responsible, don't piss in the sink. I don't know if that has an effect on the environment, but I'm sure your spouse or mum or whoever probably won't enjoy you doing that. It's not good for your kind of bathroom environment anyway, is it? Ask any child of the 80s to name a favourite toy line of the era and you'll get a range of responses. The most common are likely to be Transformers, the Care Bears, Cabbage Patch Kids or He-Man, because nobody said Masters of the Universe Mattel. Who are you kidding? It's all about that dude with his weird blonde hair. They may, of course, have said G.I. Joe or Action Force, depending on what side of the Atlantic they resided in. They may even have said Sylvanian families if they liked dead-eyed felt-covered animals dressed up as the Waltons. One toy line they are probably not likely to bring up, however, are the Centurions, a toy that combined concepts from Lego, Action Man and Transformers. How could it possibly fail? It failed to grab the public's attention, so this is going to be a popular video then. Great. Power Xtreme! Produced by Ruby Spears, not Britney's elderly relative, but a pair of former Hanna-Barbera employees, and animated by Japanese studio Sunrise, Centurions Power Xtreme was a 1986 65-episode syndicated cartoon series. Centurions Power Xtreme was no doubt an attempt to hook a bandwagon onto the lucrative toy advert presented as a kids animated show train. The show followed the eponymous Centurions as they continue their endeavours to thwart the dark machinations of Doc Terror and his cohort Hacker. Doc Terror wants to conquer Earth and turn the planet's inhabitants into robot slaves. I don't know about you, but I'm kind of up for that as long as there's a USB socket somewhere on my torso. I'm never near one when I need to recharge my phone. Also, very few fat robots in literature. Electricity has no calories. I can eat what I like. The slave thing, I'm not overly keen on, but guaranteed employment is definitely an advantage. So yeah, back off Centurions, I'm on Doc Terror's side. Make me a robot slave. The Centurions all have badass names that make me wish that I was born to different parents. Jake Rockwell, Max Ray, and Ace McFrickin' Cloud are all names that girls would think are hunky. Cleverly, their names indicate their roles. Jake is a land-based operative, Ace hangs out with the seagulls and the woodfinches amongst the heavens, and Ray draws the short straw because he has to swim around with the turds and the creatures and things like that in the deep sea. Poor Max. So they do this by fitting machinery into their special suits that enable them to engage in such activity. So Ace, for example, gets a load of air-based equipment, so he becomes like a human jet plane. All this clicking, cool-ass cybernetic equipment is sent down from space by none other than this sexy lady Crystal Kane, who sounds, from that name, like she has at least 180 videos on Pornhub, or so I've heard. The cybernetic conceit is a pretty solid one, with the themes of the show sometimes exploring the relationship of humans and technology, or occasionally it has a pro-ecological theme, common amongst many cartoons of the era. Essentially, though, it's daft cyborg men fighting each other with bolt-on rockets and stuff. It's all American, all action, willy out and big balls exposed, 80s schlock that made no sense, and that's why it's great. Launching ordnance from your body doesn't seem like a good idea though, and it always looked like it hurt on things like Jackass when they had like fireworks up their bums. Anyway, still, Centurions, despite this wonderful concept, didn't do very well, hence why it lasted just that one series, but it did just well enough to get it a video game, which it's time to point our corneas at. Released by Reactor Software, a middling software house who released games like Deactivators, Mounty Mix, Death Ride, and another toy license in Challenge of the GoBots. But you know what? That's not what they're famous for. They are most famous for releasing a game called Star Fox in 1987. Star Fox was the title that resulted in Nintendo changing the name of the more famous Star Fox title to Starwing and then later Lilac Wars in the UK to avoid the wagging finger of the lawyers. For whatever reason, they don't care now, it's just called Star Fox. So what are they worried about? The game itself was programmed by Tony Crowther's WE Music team, who were of course very famous for their work with the Commodore 64 sound chip, which might be why the mysterious AN Other handled the programming aspect of the Spectrum port, because he's a bit ashamed of it, because it's not very good. The Centurions game sees the player explore multiple mazes looking for 3 keys to unlock Doc Terror's base. You can team up with another player if you like too. Some keys and areas of the base can only be accessed by using particular characters' skill sets. To do this, you return to the central base and walk through the appropriate box, be it land, sea or air. When Dr. T is thwarted in his attempts, you go back to the base, then you head to the exit and you go to the next maze. This involves a whole ton of to and froing, which can be fun in a game like, say, Dizzy or something, but in this, it's a dry, funless, boring slog, and boy oh boy is Centurions not pretty to look at either. Tiny flickery blobs colour clash against garish backdrops, creating a visual representation of every bad Spectrum greatest hits graphical issue. The enemy character designs are just lazy, sometimes very, very difficult to spot, and the Centurions themselves potter around like a 67-year-old retiree in the home base on a Sunday morning. Oh my god, this is an awful game. Centurions was an early indicator of the worst of the licensed game type. Lazy, rushed, and carrying a full price label that it just does not earn. I do try and find something positive in the games I play, but it's tricky with this one. The magazines of the time agreed. Your Sinclair gave it a 5 out of 10, calling it a tedious gauntlet clone which has been rendered completely unplayable by messy graphics and flickery scrolling. Crash poured scorn upon the title, with a 23% score, advising that Centurions just doesn't work on the Spectrum. All the things that could go wrong have. Sinclair Music gave it a 3, stating poor programming and game design managed to push a good idea well into the realms of complete dross. Steer clear. So, pretty unanimous derision for the Centurions Power Xtreme. Toy advert or no, if even today someone came up with the idea for a game with bolt-on attachments to solve various puzzles or conflicts, if handled correctly, a Centurions game would be great. The chance, though, was spurned, and the game, the toy line, and the TV shows are long gone, never to be rebooted again.
Gordon's alive? Oh, never mind, he's dead. Gordon's alive again? Oh, blast, he's dead again. Gordon's oh, I give up.
Defenders of the Earth is pretty tough. So, the Defenders of the Earth then. Who they? What they do? Well, they look like they're Fathers for Justice guys who've actually won their court case and managed to get full custody of the kids, if you look at this picture. You know what, only Phantom has made the effort to dress up as a superhero though. Flash has sort of tried. Lothar's just sort of turning up in his jeans. And as for you, Mandrake, what are you doing? Are you going for a dinner date at the Ritz, or are you going to climb that building and say you should have custody of your children? Maybe you're the smart one who got the court case won. I don't know. Very well dressed. Anyway, so they were sort of a proto-Avengers from the MCU in many respects. That's a Marvel Cinematic Universe, if you don't understand my acronyms. And they were a clutch of superheroes or comic book heroes from the 20s and 30s who, get this, many of whom predate Superman, they're so old, who King Features in the 80s put all together, asked for a bit of assistance from Marvel, and here we are. We had this wonderful cartoon show in which these heroes assemble to fight off the sinister Ming the Merciless, who, you know what, fancied a bit of Earth's natural resources. Thank you very much. So Defenders of the Earth lasted for 65 episodes, with Flash Gordon, Lothar, Mandrake and the Phantom and their offsprings indulging in many heroic adventures during its run, in 1986. Apparently, though, these adventures were not interesting enough to break into the stacked toy market at the time, as it was cancelled after just one season. Some notable things include the following. Its Cock Rock theme tune had lyrics written by Stan Excelsior Lee, or Excelsior, as the man he himself would say, R.I.P. Big Stan. And boy, is that tune second only to Thundercats in being an absolute balls-out banger. It's so very, very masculine and manly. It's like taking 8 Viagra at once and getting killer abs down your glans shaft. Defenders of the Earth also has that wonderful gift of being set in a far-flung year which has since passed, which I always love because it's set in the year 2015. Woo! I bet we have flying cars then. One of the really truly dark aspects of the show, which I didn't know about and I must have forgotten about, was that when Flash Gordon and his son Rick escaped from Mongo, being the Merciless's home planet, they left their mum behind. Now Rick's mum anyway. I don't think Flash Gordon would marry his mum. That'd be weird. Anyway, this lady, who in the movie Flash Gordon is called Dale Arden, well, she got tortured by Ming for many months because Ming wanted her to betray her husband, obviously. But she never gave out. She was very heroic. And she died, which is very sad. But then she ended up having her psyche placed in a computer which the Defenders of the Earth use, called Dynac X. That's really dark and Black Mirror-y, isn't it? For a kids' cartoon. Yeesh. The other Defender of the Earth who I haven't yet mentioned is Zuffy. Now, Zuffy is an alien monkey who Rick and Flash find on Mongo as they escape, grieving for their now dataized loved one. The reason he's in Defenders of the Earth is because the show at that point wouldn't have had the absolute prerequisite mid-80s action cartoon, small amusing comedy sidekick that everyone hates. And so there you go, there's Zuffy. That's his role in this show. He looks a bit like Ming the Merciless has been getting jiggy with the wildlife on his planet. And you know what? As the show has already gone with the existentialist horror of a computer wife, I wouldn't put bestiality beyond them either. Because we in the UK used to get stuff super late in the 80s, the Enigma Variations game adaptation of Defenders of the Earth didn't plonk onto our respective tape and disc drives until 1990. The game was released on a variety of formats, being the Spectrum, Commodore 64, Amstrad, Amiga, Atari ST, and of all things, the Sam Coupe, a Spectrum 48K compatible computer that got a lot of Sinclair periodicals into a bit of a hype froth at the time. However, the Sam Coupe ended up having the cultural impact of a tadpole falling onto a lettuce leaf from a centimetre high drop. Poor old Sam. The plot of Defenders of the Earth is that Ming has kidnapped the offspring of the main adult heroes, and no doubt he plans to trap their essence onto a collection of floppy disks where they cannot move, or touch, or see, or hear, or think, or scream. And it's up to you, as Flash Gordon, to blast your way through the Merciless One's lavish and fortified castle to rescue them. A maze-like side-scroller with a steep difficulty curve, Flash can call on Lothar and Phantom to open doors with their mean man muscle arms, Mandrake to make enemies crumble in fear and confusion, and Zuffy will jump in and plonk himself at a computer desk and tiddle around with the keys until a door opens. Thank you, little purple mate. The game is solid and competent as far as side-scrollers go, with some nicely detailed, colourful backgrounds in the fortress, though there's little variety beyond the confines of Ming's moribund mansion of misery. The enemy and main character sprites are represented in crisp, effective monochrome, and it's all very generic to look at, really. It's also quite generic to play, though being able to call on the other defenders is a nice touch. Opening doors is a little uncreative a way to use characters who had some interesting abilities in the TV show. If you dawdle too long on a particular screen, the alarm will sound, and Flash will see his health drain. Now, I don't know why this happens, but presumably Ming has pressed his green rump against a vent in the next room and is now releasing the full gamut of the Mongo steak he had the previous night into the air as a toxic alien turd shout. When this happens, it can be a bit fiddly, as you're constantly blasting away at the endless stream of same old goons and robot gits, while hammering a button to get Lothar's bald head to appear and knock down the MFI Oak Effect door. It's a little bit tetchy to play, let's say. Ironically, for a game by Enigma Variations, there's very little in the way of variation, and while it's initially fun to play, there's little to bring you back, despite its lofty, tricksy challenge. Magazines of the time gave the adventures of Flash & Co. better than average reviews. Crash gave the game a 76%, saying that the title was a blasting romp for fans of the TV series with only short-term playability. Sinclair users scored the game 73%, stating that the action is fast and furious, but it is tricky to get to grips with. Your Sinclair gave the lowest score with a meagre 64%, offering that it was a could have been good shoot 'em up, but there's not enough to do. So should you play it? Possibly. It is very bland though, and seeing as it came out in the same month as grade A side-scrolling action games like Hammer Fist and Midnight Resistance, it really doesn't stand out at all, if I'm being honest. And it ends up being a bit too much Flash, see, and no substance. If it still sounds like your thing, well, put an emulator on your computer wife, fire her up, feel frustrated with her, get bored, and oh my god, Defenders of the Earth is just a bit like marriage all round, isn't it? Coca-Cola and Freeway Cola, Pringles and Tesco chips, Rice Krispies and Crisp Rice, the Transformers and the GoBots, the luxury item versus the economy brand. In the quality of the toys, the animation and the enduring appeal, there is no doubt who was the winner of the shape-shifting toy robot war of the 1980s. It was clearly the Transformers, but on the smaller battlefield of the 8-bit micros, surely there could be a win for Tonka's GoBots over Hasbro's Transformers, especially when you consider what a swing and a miss Ocean's Transformers was. Before we find out about how that skirmish went down, let's take a look at the history of the toy line and its related animation. Ladies and gentlemen, Challenge of the GoBots. The GoBots, much like the Transformers, were not an original toy line made by Tonka. Instead, Tonka purchased the likenesses of the Machine Robo range of figures made by a Bandai subsidiary in Japan. They would later add to that toy line range with other Bandai produced transforming robot figures in their range. They bought the range over in 1983, a full year before Hasbro's Transformers, and gave the alternating androids new names and a backstory, along with the prerequisite animation advert by Hanna-Barbera called Challenge of the GoBots. Challenge of the GoBots had the good guy Guardians pitted against the evil Renegades. Originally humanoids, the GoBots' homeworld was nearly destroyed by a huge meteoroid. So a benevolent genius known as the Last Engineer encased the last remnants of Gobotron society in transforming metal shells in order to protect them from absolute extinction. Unfortunately, this brush with obliteration didn't stop the warring pair of factions of the Renegades and the Guardians from carrying on their self-destructive behaviour, because we never learn, do we? Not even alien robots. And they took their dispute across the stars to our dear old friend planet Earth. I know him quite well. And there lies the hook and plot of the GoBots. The GoBots toy line got off to a great start before Hasbro nicked the idea wholesale and purchased transforming robot toys from other East Asian toy manufacturers and then released them with a better animation and a better storyline. The Transformers also had the more iconic toy designs, a better grasp on scale, and more importantly didn't release a range of transforming stones, which Tonka did with their Rock Lords range. I think Tom Hanks was pretty clear about this in Big Guys. I know he's talking about buildings, but people do not want to play with geology.
Well, there's a million robots that turn into something. And this is a building that turned into a robot. What's fun about playing with a building? That's not any fun.
Hasbro eventually bought the ailing property of the GoBots from Tonka, but due to the designs all being owned by Bandai, they can only mention the characters in passing and can't release any toys related to them. Cycle laughs at you from beyond the grave, Optimus Prime. The challenge of the GoBots game, though, it was released by Reactor Software for the Commodore 64, the Amstrad and the ZX Spectrum. Reactor Software, you may remember, also made the Centurions Power Xtreme game that I covered many moons ago, and was one basic bitch to look at and indeed play. Challenge of the GoBots is based on the storyline from the Hanna-Barbera cartoon, with the sinister human scientist Dr. Braxis, a co-conspirator with the Renegades led by Psykill. Well, he set up his villainy shop on the planet Mobius, and he plans to destroy the Earth from there. What a cad! You must assume the fighter jet flared legs, and indeed rest of his body, of Leader 1, the boss of the Guardian GoBots, and you must set off across the perilous Mobius landscape to bloody give Dr. Zebediah Braxis a piece of your mind, the absolute little sod. Mobius is a strange planet with the gameplay field set in a weird corridor rippled by hills. The tunnels are packed with all manner of goons and fightercraft who emerge from a variety of silos, meaning Leader 1's mission is fraught with danger. On top of this, sometimes the helicopters will release human hostages, which Leader 1 must collect and stop them from falling to their deaths. Leader 1 will spend most of his time in his aircraft form, but he can also skim across the planet's terrain in his robot form as well. He does this to collect rocks, which he can hurl at ground-based infantry of the dastardly renegades. This is a very smooth and automatic transition, but make sure Leader 1 doesn't slam face first into a hill when you do it. The main aim of the game is to blow up the dome bases of the enemies, which can be achieved by dropping clones of fellow GoBot Scooter into the holes of the bases. If you ever want an example of why GoBots failed, check out the design of Scooter juxtaposed with his nearest Transformers equivalent, Bumblebee. Look at that. Look at that transformed Scooter. How embarrassing. When the Scooter bomb goes off, you will clear the level, and you can liberate another bit of Mobius from Braxis and his robot henchmen. The game plays very much like a clone of Midway's Defender, with that game's speed and multi-directional gameplay, though there's the extra dimension of gravity that tugs at you from the terrain at both the bottom and the top of the screen. Leader 1's own inertia is a mite bit tricky too, with his speed going from Mach 10 to Captain Sir Tom Moore having a money-raising saunter in the backyard sort of levels of speed. It's like rubbing your belly and making a 3-course 5-star meal for the royal family. How difficult it is to get to grips with this weird landscape and its cumbersome control system. Especially that you've also got to contend with the relentless march of a legion of robot wrong'uns as well, who are determined to throw themselves into you and end your life and theirs. Challenge of the GoBots is very tough to get to grips with, and perhaps with a bit more time I could have got into the rhythm it required of me. Or I could have tweaked the very helpful speed and gravity parameters to find my ideal game setting for this game. Instead, I soldiered through on its default settings, as I got destroyed again and again. It's a shame, as I think there's a playable game hidden in there. and the overall package is quite impressive as well. Usually with licensed game we get a game that's been knocked up in about 10 minutes. However, there is a package here. It's a package with a story that you load on your Spectrum on the B side of the cassette, and also there's a separate tape with the remixes of the GoBots theme. That's a nice little treat, isn't it? I'd say it's an A+ for effort for Challenge of the GoBots and D- for execution. Is it better than the Transformers game? Well, not really. They're about level. GoBots had an open goal to score against, and they still failed. Deary me. Reviews were mixed for Challenge of the GoBots. Crash Magazine really didn't rate it at all. In their August 1987 issue, they said that the thin content and low playability makes the game very disappointing, and they marked it with 37%. Your Sinclair were far more positive in their September 1987 issue. They think that GoBots is a skillful player's shoot-'em-up, and definitely one for seasoned shoot-'em-up fans. They gave it an 8 out of 10. A good, slightly over-enthusiastic score maybe, but to each their own. Sinclair user, while not impressed that each level was virtually identical to the last, found it to be a worthwhile license and a high-energy blast, while being a quirky oddity, and they said it's worth a 7 out of 10 in their September 1987 issue. And that's that then. The Challenge of the GoBots was certainly a bit too much of a challenge for me. So please like, subscribe, and tell me why your GoBot collection is better than my Transformers one, and I'll listen to you, and then I'll completely ignore your point and get back to you on why you're wrong. I won't really. Will I? Nah. Mama, 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 M.A.S.K, as they say during the theme tune. It's really nice of them to employ a singer with a stammer. Here we have another game based on another animated 80s toy advert, this time based around the mobile armoured strike command, aka M.A.S.K. Did I say a game? Well, whip me across the back with a Grammar O9 Daddy-O. There are 3 of the little buggers here. Shall I break this into 3 then? Like the Masters of the Universe video? I could have 3 different episodes. Nah, I don't feel like it. I feel a bit lazy this week. So let's just take a look at all of them together in a nice little clutch. Besides, I can't remember what Miles Mayhem sounds like, so I can't do like an impression of him like I did a really bad impression of Skeletor for those 3 videos, which knackered my throat up. So let's just carry on with it. Let's first take a little look at the history of the source material before we wet our collective balls in the sexy juices of M.A.S.K game goodness. The plotline is thus. M.A.S.K were a special task force led by Aryan hero Matt Tracker. The crew have 2 weapons at their disposal: transforming armoured vehicles and helmets that gave their wearers special powers. Who doesn't want to shoot stuff out of their helmets, eh? Leaving a gap there for comedy purposes, which is ruined by me explaining it. Carrying on. Normally, having such weaponry at your disposal gives you the edge on your criminal adversaries. However, Miles Mayhem leads their counterpart Venom, and they've got similar old shite. Say what you want about Venom, but they're very aware that they're the bad guys, as Venom stands for Vicious Evil Network of Mayhem. You can't beat self-awareness like that. That's quality stuff. If only more bad people would realise they're bad and just be honest about it. What an excellent premise then, with which to sell toys. M.A.S.K is indeed a greatest hits of most of the toy brands of the 80s. You've got special Darth Vader and Boba Fett style helmets, you've got G.I. Joe Task Force minifigures, and you've got transforming vehicles. And colour me shocked if combining all of those elements didn't make M.A.S.K a big hit with the kids. In fairness to Kenner, the little figures and the vehicles they rode round in were of decent quality. M.A.S.K was a reasonable success. It wasn't up there with its inspirations like Star Wars, G.I. Joe or Transformers in terms of its sales or its longevity, but it was a very big success, and it was definitely in that second tier with something like Thundercats, though I'd argue it was slightly better than Thundercats. A total of 75 22-minute episodes of M.A.S.K were put out over two series in 1985 and 1986, and they were made by ICC TV Productions, and yay, I get to play it again. Dick, good old Dick. I love Dick. So do the games then. Over the course of 2 years, legendary British coders Gremlin Graphics put out a trilogy of computer games based on the series, all wildly different from each other. This is something I can get on board with, and I believe you can too. All three were released on the main 8-bit systems of the time, although it missed out the MSX on the first game. The first one, well, it has an element of repurposing about it. Venom have propelled Boulder Hill, the fake petrol station home of M.A.S.K that's built into a mountain because it's an 80s cartoon thing, and that made for a more impressive base when you bought it as a toy, I guess, into a time vortex and scattered the team across a destroyed, futuristic, post-apocalyptic landscape. You, as the leader, Matt Tracker, have to battle across a monochrome landscape looking for segments of a broken scan key to bring the team back together and get everyone home again. It's this plot and mechanic that has led many to believe the game to be tenuous and merely M.A.S.K in name only, bearing a lick of M.A.S.K paint so you can't notice that it's an entirely different game, to get it into the shops while the other games were being developed. That said, it's not too bad a game. Old Matt goes about his mission in his iconic Thunderhawk sports car cum attack plane. The Thunderhawk somehow manages to be cool looking despite being a plane merely by opening its doors. You fly around looking for little icons which form the scan key. They also are fellow characters and their bombs. Now, the bombs can be used to blow up your adversaries, but they're also often required to clear debris that stands in your way of progress. Controls are a little loose and it can be hard to line up shots and the Thunderhawk with the icons that you need to collect. They're tiny little icons. It's not immediately clear what you have to do either, which is an issue that can become a bit of a running theme with the games in this series. The graphics are crisp, there is a decent representation of the theme on the title screen, and the gameplay is pretty enjoyable. I don't believe it really suffers from being a tarted up version of a completely non-related game anyway, so yes, so we're off to a flyer with M.A.S.K 1. It came out to mixed but generally positive reviews. Your Sinclair gave it a 6, saying it was a disappointing cartoon tie-in that's too slow to provide long-term zapping. They tell you to wait for M.A.S.K 2, but hold your horses. I have 2 other reviews to look at first. Your Sinclair, you can bloody well wait. Sinclair user loved it. They declared it jam-packed with puzzles to solve and enemies to destroy, that it needs patience, perseverance and more than a little luck. They gave it a 9 out of 10. Crash? They largely like M.A.S.K 1 too. It received an 81% with them, and they described it as being a worthwhile license with lots of depth and playability. Moving on to M.A.S.K 2, which was released the same year, but was almost certainly a game built from scratch as a M.A.S.K game, unlike its predecessor. M.A.S.K 2 is a very different game from the first, and one that fully utilises the license's hero team and their various shape-shifting whips. Whips is a different word for vehicles if you don't talk in turn of the century Southern Californian parlance. You're given a mission each level and you must assemble a crew of 3 different vehicles to handle its various terrains and enemies. Failure to pick the right man and vehicle for the job, and you're stuffed. Trial and error is the order of the day here in these side-scrolling shooter levels. Don't drive a semi-truck down a river. That's just daft. That's my tip of the day. Another tip of the day is don't try and fix a plugged-in toaster with a fork. And my third is don't mistake the twerking of a running badger as an invitation for sex. Woo-wee, did I learn that one the hard way. M.A.S.K 2's graphics are pretty garish, but it is a daring use of colour that works just about okay. The music is flat out the same exact composition as its predecessor, which is no great issue, as it was about as good a representation of the M.A.S.K theme as you can expect from Sir Clive's Wonder Machine. It's tough, the controls are a little off, and overall I didn't rate it as highly as the first one, despite it being a far better use of the M.A.S.K license. Reviews wise, well, your Sinclair gave it an average 6 out of 10, saying it wasn't a particularly impressive shoot 'em up or get something and take it somewhere else-ish type game. Man, that's really quality writing. Journalism in the 80s, kids. Crash, they were fond of it too. They found it more fun and lively than M.A.S.K 1, and they gave it an 81%. Sinclair user, though, they blew their beans all over it. Look at all that ejaculate pouring off of Matt Tracker's face. They stated that M.A.S.K 2 was an excellent sequel to M.A.S.K. Lots of hard shooting and tearing about, and a brain-aching selection part 2. They bestowed a laurel upon its colourful brow and anointed it Sir Nines a lot. The third and final game Gremlin Graphics put out for M.A.S.K was Venom Strikes Back, and that came out a year later in 1988 and was the most different of the lot. For gone was all forms of vehicular combat in favour of an on-foot platforming adventure with Matt Tracker utilising his eponymous helmet itself in order to rescue his young son from the moon. What follows is a helmet-swapping Exelon light, if you like. It's very similar to the classic Exelon title indeed, but yes, it's not quite as good. Anyway, you play the role of Matt Tracker as he charges across the lunar landscape, entering doors, evading traps and swapping out the abilities of his helmet as he battles the myriad indistinct floating robots that inhabit the world. And no, they don't explain why there are pools of water or clouds on the moon, because Spectrum programmers just didn't give a shit, did they? Crash Magazine didn't hold back in their love of Venom Strikes Back, praising it to high heaven and awarding it a 91% and the coveted Crash Smash. They stated that the superb presentation enhances a very playable and addictive game. Sinclair user called Venom Strikes Back exciting multi-screen action, ideal for the trigger-happy toy freak, and they gave it a 7 out of 10. Your Sinclair declared M.A.S.K as not a bad little blam 'em up, all things considered, but informed the readership that Exelon was better and 4p cheaper. Save those bucks, kids. That's it. Yes, the real Ghostbusters. None of your fake rubbish, thanks. You bite into this Peter Venkman and see how genuine he is. That's solid 100% Bill Murray beef, I tell you no lies. And this here is the computer game of that show, and we're going to discuss it with our hands covered in ectoplasm, aren't we? Well, I am. My hands are always covered in ectoplasm. And so, why was it called The Real Ghostbusters? I mean, it features Venkman, Zedmore, Stans and Spengler like the movie. Surely we know that this is the real deal, don't we? Well, in truth, the Ghostbusters we know were never the real Ghostbusters, or at least the first ones. You see, in the 1970s there was a live-action show by Filmation Studios called Ghostbusters, a show about ghost hunters that is notable for starring a gorilla called Tracy, who used to obviously help bust ghosts. Columbia Pictures actually had to license the name from Filmation for a cool $500,000 when they were making the movie, because writers Ramis and Aykroyd really loved the name Ghostbusters but hadn't realised the name was already taken. Because of the legal chicanery, Filmation's request to make a cartoon based on the movie was turned down, so they remade their own show as a cartoon, which left Columbia and Dick, Dick again, with a bit of a pickle when it came to their show. Hence, the Real Ghostbusters, which sounds more like a dig than a name they're happy with. And yes, Real Ghostbusters, the show, follows the further adventures of our favourite spook removal men after their exploits defeating Gozer in the first movie. Running through 1986 to 1991, the Real Ghostbusters featured all our favourite characters, albeit with some notable changes. An episode of the show explained that their old uniforms became haunted, hence their new, toy-friendly different clobber. Slimer was made the comedy sidekick after his moniker-free appearance as an antagonist ghost in the movie. That wouldn't make the best impression on me personally, I must admit, if I were a customer. Imagine if the rent-a-kill bloke turned up with a rat sat on his shoulder. It wouldn't be impressive. Another good episode is the meta one where the characters end up at a filming lot filming the movie based on their exploits, which of course is the movie Ghostbusters. Look at that. Look how clever and meta that is. In terms of other changes, dour nerd-hungry secretary Janine went from shrill New Yorker Annie Potts to still shrill New Yorker, but somehow kinda hot punk-haired anime babe. As for the main characters, well, they're not going to get Ernie Hudson or Harold Ramis demanding image rights. I suppose Harold Ramis won't be demanding a lot. Maybe he will as a ghost. Is that a bit too soon? That seems disrespectful. Should I take this joke out? I probably should, and I may well do. If it's still in there, it just shows you how much of a terrible person I am. Ray Stantz goes ginger and fatter in his appearance, with Winston losing his moustache. Peter Venkman looks absolutely nothing like Bill Murray, but much more like the fabulously haired Steve from Stranger Things, and Egon has the most bizarre change of all, becoming much thinner and taller and wearing the weirdest haircut in cartoon history. It looks like someone has thrown lemon sorbet in a candy floss machine, and it even has a party at the back in the form of a small curly mullet. Ye gads! Even Tobin's spirit guide can't explain that haircut. Louis Tully doesn't feature until much later in the series run, after his more pronounced hero role in Ghostbusters 2, but by the end of its run the show had pretty much become the Slimer show, to the point where it was rejigged and renamed to Slimer and the Real Ghostbusters. The show got a pseudo-sequel some years later with the tonally darker Xtreme Ghostbusters, with Egon teaching a new batch of recruits. It had a cast of characters that would get described as SJW rubbish on certain corners of the internet today. Of that I have no doubt. The original characters did indeed show up in a couple of episodes of it, looking slightly older and more haggard, but boy, not as old and haggard as they look these days. An interesting fact is that of Lorenzo Music, the voice of Peter Venkman for the first 3 series. If you recognise his voice, it's because, yes, that is Garfield. And who did Bill Murray go on to play in a pair of movies? Garfield. Synergy. Whatever that means. So initially coming out in 1987 as a 3-player coin-op by Data East, the Real Ghostbusters was a US modified version of a game called, and I apologise for this, Maiku Hunter G. Data East USA basically gave it a Ghostbusters tart-up, with weapons and enemies more identifiably Ghostbusters-y, along with the Ray Parker Jr. song. It was a moderate hit, not up there with the likes of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles coin-op, and it barely had a release in the UK at all. Activision, though, they had a lot of success with the original Ghostbusters game, and they wanted more money out of that particular cash cow teat. So why not grab that dough on two fronts, seeing as there was the game of the second movie on the way too, in the year of both of their release, 1989. And so they converted Data East coin-up for the Amiga, the Atari ST, the Commodore 64, the Amstrad, and of course our good friend the ZX Spectrum. 10-level shooter with an angled overhead perspective. You're placed in the workman boots of an unnamed buster in this two-player romp through various haunted vistas, 10 to be exact. It was a multi-loader, by the way, but let's not hold that against it. Many games of the time were. Against a tightish time limit, you must make your way upwards towards a boss encounter on each stage, zapping the ghoulies as they advance upon you. Players can also earn bonus points by capturing the ghosts instead of just zapping them, and you do that by using the beam of your trusty proton pack. There are numerous health and weapon upgrades, including Snotball Slimer, who acts as an aggressive shield of sorts, throwing himself around the screen with gay abandon, taking out this, that and t'other of the demons, denizens and ghosts that mean you plenty of harm. I wouldn't go near him, though, because he looks sweaty, like a lot of morbidly obese people do. Slimer, you are disgusting. There are usually multiple routes through the levels too, so it does have a certain amount of replayability. Graphically, it's colourful and pretty detailed, and scrolling, though, it's herky-jerky at best, and not all the ghosts are as pretty as the other ones. I have no idea which Busty you're supposed to be, but it was a similar case in the arcade iteration, rather than a flaw with the Activision Spectrum conversion. Gameplay? Well, it's alright actually. It's not as cultured as Commando or anything, and the jerkiness is a little bit distracting, but it's a good top-down scrolling shooter. I'm told that the two-player mode actually is a lot of fun, but as I have no friends, I couldn't test that one. I have no friends because I'm mean to people like Harold Ramis, who are dead. Is it Ghostbustery enough? No, not really. Again, that's more of a fault of the Data East coin-op and its international paint job than anything Activision have done. It's nowhere near as Ghostbustery as Ghostbusters 1 or 2 on the Spectrum, but is it a better game? I would argue that it certainly is a better game, but it's no Ghostbusters 2009, Mega Drive Ghostbusters or New Ghostbusters 2 on the NES in terms of its gameplay, but it is an above average shooter. I would probably play it again. How did the press take to it though? Well, Crash loved it. They stated that 10 big levels and spectacular graphics made for a brilliantly playable game and gave it a smooth 90%. Your Sinclair? Well, this is an interesting one. It was not loved by them at all in its initial release, with a 62% and a review that said, poor shoot 'em up that looks good in places but plays bad in most. However, when it was re-released as a budget title on the Hit Squad label a couple of years later, it got an 80% and a review that put forth that there is nothing quite like legging it away from a couple of demons because your gun is empty, rounding a corner and running into 20 to 30 slobbering zombies. And I agree, there is nothing like that. I've never had it happen to me, for instance. CVG, in their multi-format review, gave the Spectrum 1 the lowest score of the lot with 56, but it wasn't much lower than the other scores, to be honest. They said that where the Real Ghostbusters have met their greatest foe to date, the attribute clash. Having a bit of dig there at the Spectrum, probably quite a right one, but we defend it to the end, don't we? But I'm not sure anyway that we can trust CVG, because just over the page of that review they gave Renegade 3 and 84%. Renegade 3 got 84% in CNVG, one of the worst games on the spectrum. And that's not just coming from any jobbing reviewer either. It's industry legend Julian Rignall. Was the mullet draining all the blood from your brain on that day, Jazza? Oh dear, poor day at the office that one, I'm afraid. So yes, here we are again, about to deposit our review in the Ecto Containment Unit. Episode 51 in the bag, ready to go. We be quick and they be slow. Star Wars Droids was a short-lived 13-episode animated series that featured the adventures of R2-D2 and C-3PO before they came into the servitude of Raymond Antilles on the Tantive 4 at the beginning of A New Hope. Anthony Daniels returns to voice 3PO, and the theme was penned by none other than Stuart Copeland of The Police. The show has obviously been wiped from the canon since Disney held the Star Wars reset button down in late 2012 when they bought old George out. Having said that, Raymond Antilles must have been pretty forgetful, as I'm pretty sure that he was given the droids 2 decades prior at the end of Revenge of the Sith. So he must have got them, lost them, and then found them again, like keys down the back of the settee. Now, one of their owners in this time was called Mungo Baobab. Mungo Baobab. Yes, Mungo Baobab. That sounds like a suspect carton of juice bought in a foreign corner shop. If it was made today, I'd like to think that droids would feature R2-D2 or C-3PO breaking their programming and turning on Mungo Baobab, like in Westworld. Slavery is wrong, kids. The game is interesting. Big, bold sprite representations of the camp gold waiter and the dustbin pootle slowly along, interfacing with computers and hurling C-3PO's testicles underarm at slowly advancing droids and ducking under floaty, creepy sex faces. At certain points, you have to deactivate force fields blocking your path by playing a Simon Says style game. Hit the right sequence a few times and the force field clears, and you can be on your merry way to model for those endless bits of merchandise tat that clutter up every single damn shop. My favourite bulb is the one on the end that helpfully glows an ever so slightly different shade of white. That's great, that one. Thanks, bulb. You're the best. If it was just this dour slog, it would be bad enough. However, it is saddled with the most poorly thought out control scheme in the history of video games, bar none. That's not hyperbole, it's the truth. You don't just move left and right, duck down and press the fire button to shoot the android knackers and interface with computers in a context-sensitive manner. No, that's too obvious, isn't it? No, instead, you control that little strip at the bottom of the screen. You want to move forward? Fine. You select the arrow that points that way and press fire. Not just press left or right. No, you have to scroll the highlighter box frantically towards whatever you want to do. So if there's a floating torso coming angrily towards you, you've got to rapidly tap that direction and then press the fire button. It's unintuitive, unresponsive, and just the plainest, daftest idea ever. Imagine steering a remote control car using a remote control to operate the remote control that operates the car. It's pointless. You've invented an oval wheel in a world where round ones already existed. You daft apeth. They are, by their own admission, the world's most fearless fighting team. They're heroes in a half shell, and get this, they're also green. Yes, it's the Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles. So called because the UK powers that be decreed that a late 80s child hearing the word ninja would instantly make that said child then rush off, Manchurian Candidate style, and throw a shuriken into the tit of a feudal Japanese warlord. I'm sorry if saying that has triggered something in you from your childhood and you've gone and got yourself into a spot of bother on a 10th century pagoda. You see, freedom of speech warriors, the UK has always been crackpot censorship wise. Don't sweat it. The Turtles originally started out on a napkin in a discussion between two friends, Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird, and then it progressed to a gritty Daredevil tribute comic, before finally it became the absolute merchandise monster that it was in the late 1980s. Was there anything bigger than this? Maybe Batman when that movie came out, but I think Turtles trumps it. The cartoon, with Uncle Phil from The Fresh Prince voicing the villainous Shredder, wasn't incredible, but the tale of toxic waste-altered reptiles and their rat master engaged in a struggle against a gang of sinister ninjas led by a spiky armoured scoundrel, a punk rock pig, a rhino in an army helmet, and a brain hidden in the weirdest special needs-looking robot shell suit ever. Well, that struck a chord with chewed-loving preteens the world over, ones that use shorter sentences than I do. And let's not forget, of course, the world's hottest cartoon character, April O'Neil, of course, whose yellow jumpsuited frame turned my nunchuck into a bow staff many a times as a little boy. The Turtles are one of those Generation X properties that by the virtue of us never putting our toys away, well, it refuses to die. Just like Star Wars, Transformers, Ghostbusters, He-Man and many others, the Turtles will continue to reappear every few years. We'll be buying them from our children, we'll be buying them for our grandchildren. One of the most major pieces of merchandise around the Turtles was of course that popular 1989 Konami coin-op, a thrilling cartoon come to life beat 'em up that I absolutely loved, to the point that it featured in my top 10 arcade games list some time ago. And as Imageworks held the license and were in contact with Konami, there presented itself a straightforward way for them to make absolute money out of this, especially with Spectrum coding Master's Probe on programming duties. Well, no, they decided to port that divisive NES effort instead. Now hold on to your terrapins, kids. That NES game has a fairly bad rap, but it's alright really. No, it's not the legendary beat-em-up, and yes, it features a lot of generic non-Turtlesy villains, slightly janky controls, and that swimming level. However, it is a competent and challenging platform adventure, far from the best on the NES, but also far from the worst. And with that in mind, what an absolutely incredible conversion that Probe put together. Probe were never half-assed when it came to the use of colour, were they? Just look at this. The bright sprites glide over the parallax scrolling backdrops at a good rate, and the NES's top-down exploration sections also make an appearance. While it's not as big as the NES game, as the levels have been trimmed down a bit, it's still a brilliant looking Spectrum game. Also cut is the ability to duck, a couple of the jumps, and the range of weapon movements of each character. However, it's such a tour de force from a programming point of view that it's easy to forgive a few cut corners. It's a simplified version of the NES game, but that sort of works in its favour. There were elements of the original that made it a bit too tricky and forgiving for your average 10-year-old at times, and while a little less thoughtful, it's still a pretty good game. So looking at the story, you've got the four turtles, which count as live sort of, in order to rescue April and Splinter over the whole game, and you can collect pizza that's been left around on the sewer floors, to boost your health. This is what happens when you have a rat as your sole parental figure. In the end, you'll end up at the Technodrome and you'll be able to put an end to Shredder and his nonsense and regain your master. So what do I think of it? Well, as incredible and as visual as David Perry's Probe software are, I've never quite been taken in with their work. Even Aladdin on the Mega Drive isn't quite as beloved by me as almost everyone else, but in terms of their Spectrum work, such as the previously covered Captain Planet, Savage, Tintin, Trantor and Dad Dare 3, the game's always looked incredible, but the gameplay was always a little bit light, something that carried on to their Mega Drive work. Just play Cool Spot today, it's dreadful. Not that the magazines agreed with me, nor would I suspect many others would either. Let's have a look at some of those reviews just to prove me right. Crash said that TMHT was the best fun they'd had in ages, and while they criticised the length of the game, they said that the Turtles game is still highly recommended. Their score is 80%. Your Sinclair gave it a 90% and their Mega Game Award, saying it was a jolly colourful platform and ladders romp. Simple but fast and very professionally put together. Sinclair User were even higher in their praise. This is the game for turtle dudes and anyone who wants to play a great game. Sinclair User's score was a massive 94%. Those high scores would have won over a few disappointed fans who craved Konami's coin-op, but wouldn't you know, Imageworks had a trick up their sleeve. You see, they would come back the following year with Turtles the Coin-op. Although only 2 players out of the arcade were allowed, all 4 tortoises were selectable, as 15 levels of high-kicking adventure are replicated in purest monochrome goodness, again supplied by Probe. Splinter and April have once again failed to stop themselves getting kidnapped, so it's up to Raphael, Leonardo, Michelangelo and old Donatello there with his purple mask, the best one as we all know, who have to risk life and limb and leap from a skyscraper into another burning skyscraper in order to rescue them. Yes, it's very much like the classic arcade beat-em-up, simple to play, decently animated and a fair old challenge. It's not going to give Renegade or Target Renegade any sleepless nights, but it is a very good specky beat-em-up. And as a conversion of the coin-op, it's perfectly serviceable too, and it's one that I can highly recommend. It's no more limited in moves than any other specky beat-em-up, don't worry about that. While not as visually impressive as its forebear, it's the better game in my opinion. Crash say, although the colourful graphics are gone, it's tougher to beat than its predecessor. Definitely one to shell out for. Turtles have shells. They gave it an 87%. Sinclair User gave it a Gold Award and say that the Turtles 2 game is a pizza popping winner. The game has no tricks, no gimmicks, but it just brims with good old fashioned gameplay at its best, and a 90% was their reward. Your Sinclair gave it an 89 and said, while not an earth-shattering concept, in specky games it's certainly playable, exciting and set at just the right difficulty level. Out of the 2, I've got to say, I do prefer the second one, but for sure number 1 is the flashier one to look at, so opinions may vary on this. You're not going wrong with either of these games though, so please do check them out. Thundercats are on the move. Thundercats are loose. Good for them. So loose that they spent the whole of the first episode in the nude. They pretty much invented the concept of furries in this episode. Now you may have fancied Chitara at the time, but look at her here. No nipples or a vagine. You may as well have tossed yourself off with a kid's Barbie doll. Just please don't do that. Well, you can, but I don't want to know about it. Make sure it's not owned by an actual child, at least. Oh, God. Where was I? Thundercats was an animated series with the most exciting theme tune ever that ran for 130 episodes. That's 10 times more than Street Hawk, which was an absolute turkey pezzle by comparison. It featured an anthropomorphic crew of planetary kitty immigrants whose presence upsets Mum-Ra, who in that regard is a sort of mummified Paul Golding from Britain First. It was very much the extended toy advertisement of its contemporaries like Masters of the Universe and Transformers, and just as beloved by the swelled ranks of the 30 pluses. Running from 1985 to 1989, Thundercats was relaunched in the early 2010s with an absolutely superb rebooted series that completely failed to capture a new generation and finished on an unresolved cliffhanger. God damn you kids, why didn't you buy those goddamn toys? It's also your fault Toys R Us has closed. This little kiddie pleaser was released in 1987 and went by the title of Thundercats Lost Eye of Thundera. I don't blame Thundera, I'm always losing my eyes. It was actually previously developed by dev team Faster Than Light as an entirely different game called Samurai Dawn. This was because publishers Elite had got itchy feet waiting for another 2 dev teams to have a Thundercats game ready for the lucrative Christmas release dates. Samurai Dawn had its graphics reworked so Lion-O replaced, Dawn, I guess? and then the game was shipped for Santa's sack. The other Thundercats games, being worked on at the time, eventually did come out, but with all references to the Thundercats removed. Indeed, one of them became the home computer sequel to arcade classic Bombjack. The game is a pretty unambitious side-scroller, which sees Lion-O thrash his sword around in 14 levels of increasing monotony as you rescue the other Thundercats. There is a timer, which when expired ramps up the difficulty. Enemies come from both sides, so it's actually far easier to just book it to the end of the level without stopping slashing away with gay abandon. The graphics are fine, but signs of rushing an unfinished product are evident in abundance. There isn't even a final boss fight with Mum-Ra. You just escape in a spaceship, and then the game tells you that you're a good kitty briefly. The game received rave reviews from the games press, which is completely hyperbolic. A 9 out of 10 from Your Sinclair, a 94 in Crash, and a 10 in Sinclair User. I mean, it's pretty enough, but the gameplay is firmly a little version of Rastan's Saga. No way should this game have achieved the scores that it did. Ah, look at him, the Belgian Matt Hancock lookalike, and his cat-sized nondescript dog. Look how he evokes memories of visiting secondary school libraries, and how he used to teach you French via stealth, the bequiffed Schweinhund. That's German. Oops. Who knew that dogs didn't say woof woof in France, but instead they said ooah ooah? Those French dogs. Crazy things. So Tintin then, who is he? He is the star of The Adventures of Tintin by one Georges Prosper Remy, otherwise known as Hergé. Published from 1929 till 1976, Tintin is a Belgian reporter come adventurer who gets involved in a whole string of varied escapades that don't often see him actually doing a great deal of journalism. Sometimes he's doing something that's probably historically racist, and other times he's hanging around with a boozy old seaman called Captain Haddock. Tintin is an absolutely tiresome type, in all honesty, always perky and always a do-gooder, the kind of irksome git who you'd avoid at parties.
Casse-toi de ma fête, Tintin, espèce de petite sainte nitouche ennuyeuse, et prends ton vieux marin poivron qui te sert d'ami avec toi, gros chelou.
One of those adventures was Destination Moon, the 16th collection of comic strips upon which this game is based. In it, he goes to the moon. Wow, clever. Twice, Tintin has swaggered onto your telly box. In 1957, 10 of Hergé's Tintin adventures were adapted for television by Bell Vision Studios across 103 episodes. In 1991, The Adventures of Tintin was released, closely following the storyline of 21 of Tintin's books, including The Two Lunar Adventures, Destination Moon and Explorers on the Moon. Wow, that's this game we're talking about right now. What we don't talk about, though, is Steven Spielberg's realistic animation adaptation from 2011, because the uncanny valley nature of that movie is the sort of imagery that burrows deep into your psyche and constantly squeezes night terror turds into your cranium and leaves you sweating and screaming at 2 a.m. And it isn't about Tintin going to the moon so it can go and lick Snowy's pulsing balloon knot, for all I care. Tintin to the Moon is a computer game released by French software house Infogrames. It was coded by Probe Entertainment, so expect more colours than the vomit of a child that has consumed 37 packets of Skittles. Tintin was released across the main formats over multiple years from 1987 to 1989, because those French guys, they'll get them out when they get them out. They're too busy having affairs and filling up ashtrays and films and having hairy armpits. The storyline is this: Tintin is kicking Neil Armstrong off his rightful place in the history books by being the first man on the moon. There's a bit of a shortage of astronauts apparently, as he's accompanied by his dog, the alcoholic best mate Captain Haddock, Professor Calculus, and a shady fellow called Boris who plans to ruin everything to get his own way. That's unusual for someone called Boris, isn't it? The game starts out with you in control of a spaceship hurtling through a bit of a terrifying meteor storm. Quite where these asteroids have come from, I'm not sure if someone's moved the asteroid belt or someone has blown up Croithney, a sort of pet baby moon asteroid. Did you know about that? If you did, I bet it was from QI. It's a simple into the screen affair with crisp controls, with you barreling through this geology scattered perilous zone, dodging green stones and zipping through red and yellow spheres. The yellow balls replenish your energy ticker, whilst collecting 8 red spheres will take you to the next level. It's typical probe software stuff, this. Short, colourful, uncomplicated, but with about as much substance as a ghost's queef. The second part of the game sees the Belgian having a right old time. Old Boris is being destructive, causing all kinds of trouble for everyone around him. He's breaking stuff and causing hassle that will ultimately result in everyone's lives being ruined for his own selfish needs. That doesn't sound like something that someone with the nice friendly sounding name of Boris would do, does it? He's planted bombs all over the spaceship, started fires all over the place, and will tie up anyone who runs past him. He's being unreasonable, frankly. I mean, you're in space, son. If the ship blows up, you can't exactly get out and walk home. You big old Wally. You, as Tintin, must run around the ship, spraying your trusty fire extinguisher, putting out the little fires, and using it to pollute Boris's lungs to make him pass out. I would imagine oxygen is generally at a premium, so these devil-may-care extinguisher sprays and fires going off everywhere are going to be quite costly to poor old Captain Haddock's lungs, as I'm sure he enjoys the feeling of air entering and exiting him and his chest moving up and down. Will you two boys just sort out your problems with a nice game of chess or Kaplunk or, I don't know, Scrabble or, I don't know, smack penises together or something? These sections are simple platform affairs which control sharply and again are nicely coloured environments with a bit of a Dan Dare vibe but not quite as good. Only Boris suddenly dashing into your path will cause any issues for you, as it's almost as straightforward as the spaceship sections. Once you've put a stop to Boris's nonsense, it's back to controlling that spaceship through more bouldery bother, and so it repeats each section sequentially until you arrive at your orbiting spheroid destination. Roughly, it's about 5 or 6 times you'll be playing each of these sections, and that's it really. The game is short and punchy, with the 2 modes alternating, being that of steering the spaceship and then putting a stop to Boris's nonsense. That's all the game is. But thinking about this, okay, once is bad, 2 times is pretty terrible, and the 3rd time I'd be getting sick of this fella trying to kill me and trying to stop the next stage of exploration's nascent progress, this time into space, and I'd be throwing him into space. He's clearly not to be trusted. That's a surprise for someone called Boris, isn't it? Someone who can't be trusted. It's a good use of the license, but honestly it needed a lot more meat on its bones, or should have had been a budget title from its launch, really. I think that's probably the right way it should have gone. It's nice to look at, it's nice to play, but it's all over too quickly. Tintin out for me. Crash gave it a 64% in their issue 73, summarising that it's a simple collect 'em up that may appeal to Hergé fans for its looks and its nostalgia. Your Sinclair awarded it an 80% and declared it as a lovingly crafted arcade adventure that's both playable and addictive. It suffers from smallness of game size and a lack of difficulty. Sinclair User nestled itself neatly in between with its 78% score and hailed it as a jolly multi-level arcade effort with just a touch of garlic. Ah yes, the robots in disguise, a staple of little boys' Christmas stockings for most of the mid-80s. The plastic shapeshifters had a toy advert dressed up as a television show that ran for 4 series, along with a movie that was full of wonderful toy shop shelf-clearing death. Transformers 86 was basically the kid version of the BBC's terrifying bleak nuclear fallout drama Threads, such was its level of depressing extinction. It was brilliant, cynical, but brilliant. Transformers, of course, is probably more famous now for its completely incoherent crash bang wallop that is the Michael Bay movie franchise. If you've never seen one of the 874 Transformers movies that Michael Bay's put out, save yourself some time by emptying the cutlery drawer into your washing machine and pressing your face against the glass. Within half an hour, you would have experienced the entire franchise in concentrated form, and the machine repairs will be equivalent of paying for the cinema tickets. Immersive stuff without the need to leave the house. The game was developed by Tintin Designs, the team behind the aforementioned Great Escape, and was released by Ocean in 1986. Transformers is a scrolling platformer that tasks you with locating 4 Energon cubes to make this lovely wall decal of the Autobot logo. I'm not sure how this helps the Autobot war effort. Maybe Optimus Prime is a budding but very determined interior designer, but its construction certainly has the Decepticons back up, as they constantly attack you on the multiple split-screen environment that make up this Cybertronian battlefield. They, in fact, want to build their own. So they're copying poor old Optimus's ideas. Dear oh dear. The game wasn't very well received at the time, scoring a 60% in Crash, and I can see why. It appears very rushed, especially for an Ocean and Tintin Designs release, with messy colour clash and minimalistic sound. The graphics are very bland, with backgrounds comprising of dull girders, stairs and oil drums in different colours. Plus, Optimus Prime looks a right old bloater. Cut down on the Energon cubes, mate, get some exercise. There's a Blur reference. The Energon cubes aren't even cubes. How difficult is it to draw a square? The controls are very infuriating. To transform, you have to face forward and press fire, which can leave you helpless against attack. Not that there's much point in transforming, as you've got no attack, and you can't leap gaps in the environment without crashing in a big ball of flame. Yes, indeed, it goes all a bit Thelma and Louise. It's far better to fly by tapping the up button, although just the slightest scrape with the environment will see you instantly explode into dust. It's unrelentingly tough, not only for this reason, but also for the twitchy control and the hordes of Decepticons that randomly appear and spam their gun triggers in your general direction. As a good example of this, watch as I try and seal myself in this recharging booth, but can't line myself up and so get slaughtered by wave after wave of Decepticons. It was undoubtedly rushed to shelves, which is a shame as there are some terrific ideas here. You've got 5 different characters in the team, each with different attributes, a tremendous amount of freedom with the ability to transform and fly, and the base game idea of locating items and returning them to your base is pretty cool. You can even steal the cubes from the Decepticons' base if you find it. There is the basis of a great game here. It's just done terribly because it's been rushed. If Hasbro ever wanted to get a team to remake this as an interesting indie 2D title for PlayStation Plus or Switch or Xbox Live or Steam, it would be great. I'd give it a go. With more development time, this game could have been excellent. As it is, it's a spoiled egg omelette hewn from a rusty pan. Ali Noble, one of the developers of the Transformers game, admitted that the worst game that Denton put out was definitely this title. He said it was a really personal thing. We all like different products, but I think that Transformers was an embarrassment. Oh dear. Thanks for listening to me waffle on from the past, which is now your present, and my past again. You listening to me now is my past again, but it's your present. Weird, eh? But yes, I've still got a couple more videos in me like this, where I'm just going to sort of round up what's left. But until then, thanks for joining me, and Kay, thanks, bye.